The nuclear family is its own kind of like alleged utopia, right? But I think we need to get out of that and we need to start imagining more communal utopias that center pleasure and that provide a kind of autonomous zone outside of all of this.
I'm Miranda Rake.
And I'm Sarah Wheeler, and this is The Mother of It All, where we take on motherhood through the lens of culture and culture through the lens of motherhood. Welcome, everybody. In part one of our discussion, we talked about the state of hetero marriage and how the political and cultural context of today deeply influences dynamics within marriages, including sexual ones. Then, on the night of November 5th, we watched men come out in droves to elect a president who is not only a convicted sex offender, but who is deeply and explicitly drawing on gender politics to appeal to male voters and also actively oppress American women. Last time you were on, Amanda and Tracy, we asked, is there such a thing as good sex in hetero marriage? But now we wanted to invite you back to ask how the state of relations between men and women has changed since the election. And also, as you, Amanda, intimated in your post-election newsletter, if it will ever be the same. I remind our listeners that Tracy Clark Flory is the author of Want Me, A Sex Writer's Journey into the Heart of Desire, and the Substack newsletter TCF Emails, which has been popping off, as always, but especially in the last week. There's been a lot of great stuff on there. And Amanda Montei is the author of Touched Out, Motherhood, Misogyny, Consent, and Control, and the Mad Woman newsletter, and the co-host of the Reading the Comments podcast, which had a great post-election episode that touched on some of the topics we're going to get into today. So welcome, Tracy and Amanda.
Thanks for having us. Thanks.
Okay, ladies, post-election, where are you seeing the discourses? Let's just start, before we get into hetero marriage, about, gender relations.
Start with an easy one.
Yeah, you could just say bad. You can give me a thumbs down and we'll just wrap here.
Gender relations, bad.
Okay.
Anything you want to add, Tracy?
I mean, yeah, I guess I would just say in our last conversation, I believe, talked about the 4B movement. And then now post-election, immediately there was this huge uptick in searches for the 4B movement, this movement to reproductively, sexually, romantically boycott men. And so I feel like that has gotten a lot of attention in the US in reaction to the election results, which, also inspired this rise in misogynistic rhetoric online there was a report put out that found this rise in, the use of the phrase, your body, my choice, and get back in the kitchen. So there's this sort of call and response, I think, where it's the election of Trump itself, and then this rise in online misogyny, and then on the other hand, this increase in interest in the 4B movement. I would say that, we were already discussing these things, but now it has, been underscored that much more.
Okay, so you're talking about, I think a lot of us, when last week, were remembering some of the things that happened after the 2016 election, where particularly for those of us who are marginalized, for people of color, a lot of people experienced this energy, this extra kind of permission to go really hard into some of the daily activities that are involved in the rhetoric of the GOP, right? A lot of people of color experienced people the day after the election in 2016, rolling down their windows and shouting racial epithets at them, right? And so you're seeing something similar happening online in terms of misogyny since the election, I think is what you're saying, a permission to really lean into it.
Yeah, and
for some
in
men.
addition, I would say it's a
And then on the
permission.
other side, women are responding by getting, doing internet searches for this movement that started in South Korea, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
thinking about divesting from men.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say it's more than just permission. It's like there's this, a lot of it is this kind of trolling, shit posting attitude and tone. And so that is very much about trying to get a reaction and trying to disturb. And it is just like that very Manospherean, over the top sort of attitude.
Well, I mean, how empowering to have, to have all of these, figureheads of violence towards women
Right.
get, overnight get even more power.
Yeah.
Amanda,
Yeah,
what's
I
on
would
your mind?
just going back to what you mentioned in your introduction, Sarah, about the sort of like gender war,
Hmm.
as some are calling it. I think that I'm seeing some resistance crop up around that term, which I think is sort of relevant to what you're both talking about here, which is that this idea that we're like in a moment of gender war implies that there are like two equally opposing sides. And I
Hmm.
think that resistance to that term, kind of given that implication is exactly right. I think that what we are living through right now is a war on women. I think it's a war on immigrants and queer people as well, on really anyone who would disrupt the political power that, white men gain from the nuclear family and the gender binary. So I just want to kind of like center that sort of critique of the so-called gender war, because we're talking about like, oh, men are doing this online and women are doing this online, but
Yep.
it's
Yep.
not an equal playing field.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's something I thought about in some of the conversations around how we're talking to children about the election, even before it happened, and talking to children about Trump. And I have I'm trained as a school psychologist. I am all for not giving kids more information than is useful for them, and being aware of what kids need to know and adults need to know. At the same time, you know, if I have a hard time with arguments that say that, we might be speaking too harshly about Trump or the GOP right now to children, and that we should think about, the other side, and that, that GOP parents are also speaking harshly about, Democrats, and should we be, having a more balanced conversation. And I know it's like perhaps a little hyperbolic, but I keep thinking, well, if Hitler were coming into power, would I have regretted being clear to my parents, to my children, excuse me, that this was a fascist who was, unequivocally bad? I don't think I would have wished that I'd said like, well, you have to have empathy for him. So or, everybody has different opinions. Sure, we might feel that way about something like taxes. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but, we might say that. But everybody has different opinions about what women do with their bodies is true, but it's not really working for me anymore um, as an argument. So
Mhm.
uh, that's what I think about when I think about you talking about this isn't a gender war, right? These aren't two equal sides. It's a war against women.
I think knowing our audience, right? Like we're preaching to the choir. Like I don't think people who are listening to this show are like big Trump voters. Although, if you're out there, good for you, I guess. But I think
I don't know.
no, I mean,
But
congratulations, whatever. But like
yeah.
I think that what is going on too here is like we are four white women of varying degrees of privilege, like sitting here preaching to the choir. Like, so as much as I like want to have this conversation, I just want to express like a sense of, you know, like this talking to each other like this, right? Hasn't gotten us very far yet. Or has it? And like this is the reaction, and I don't know. And I think that our generation as millennials, whatever false or real feelings we have about these kinds of like markers, it's like what I'm reading that's like moving me, that is fascinating me, is the stuff about and the kind of gender war like pieces that I've read. I just sent Sarah one this morning from the um,
Ballet Review of Books.
Sophie
Yeah.
Kemp. Yeah,
Yeah, and
about
Gia
writing as a
Tolentino had a
younger,
great one in the New Yorker, yeah, a few
yeah,
days
like
after the
writing as a
election.
younger woman who's like in there. And kind of this relates to the 4B movement that you're referencing. Like before, it's like, you know, the demographic breakdown of like Gen Z men, who I guess I was relying on. I don't know. I just thought the young people will vote this way. And then it was like, well, the young women went for Kamala, and then a lot of young men like went for
So, well, you're
Trump.
bringing up a bunch of things. What I'm
Yeah.
hearing, and I think our guests could probably speak to all of them.
Yeah.
One is this question about, how did we get here? And has what I think when you say we, you're meaning maybe feminists and maybe white privileged feminists. I'm not sure. What have
Yeah.
we been doing up to this point, and how has it worked or not, and how has that interacted with the forces that, that have power in our society? And then you're bringing up this other piece about women voting for Trump,
Right.
and kind of what we do with
White
that as
women,
women.
like white, a lot of
Yes.
white ladies voted for Trump. And I
Yeah.
think, so there's an element for me of like looking in the mirror also. And like it's not so much about empathy as a need to the ways in which empathy may bring me to understanding. Like, and that doesn't mean forgiveness or it doesn't mean like making it okay. It's like I have to be able to find that path of like understanding even in order to move forward or to try to
Yeah.
change,
So
like,
let's take this piece by piece,
yeah,
because I think you're bringing up a lot of the
yeah,
things that people are having difficulty with in this conversation. Um, so so there's the empathy piece, there's the women who voted for Trump. And then there's kind of the feminist history of it all. And kind of I've also seen a certain discourse online of, kind of blaming feminism for what happened. So Amanda and Tracy, where do you want to start?
solve it all right now.
I mean, I think it is a lot. I think you're talking about a lot of different people and a lot of different groups and a lot of different
Yeah.
sort of reactive moments that we're seeing like post-election. So I appreciate the kind of like slowing it down, Sarah. I think that when we're talking about white women who voted for Trump, for me, the level of understanding is pretty straightforward. These women think that they benefit from white supremacy and patriarchy, and they're voting in their own self-interest. So, sort of beyond that, I don't currently at this moment have much empathy reserves to offer those voters.
And
So
you
just say
talked about
that.
this a little bit on your podcast, Amanda. I found it really fascinating, because my first reaction is like, how could it be in their self-interest? But you're talking about, women who are planning to stay married, right? Who don't need to have access to divorce, right? Who don't need necessarily think that they will need an abortion.
Right. Or don't think that they, yeah, need access to no fault divorce, or may not even be aware of the fact that those rights are under threat. So
Hmm.
there's also another piece that I actually think we should talk about more in terms of the young men, but, in terms of like the way that information moves now and the sort of false
Yeah.
reality that a large portion of this country lives in. And we've seen exit polls that show that, there are many people who felt that they were voting in their self-interest, and they may find later that in fact they were not. Right. And then there's a whole conversation about, oh, should we feel like, haha, too bad for you, or should we have empathy for those voters?
Tracy, what about this piece about kind of feminism being responsible for this election result? I knew
I
I
mean,
said it because I knew I'd get a reaction from you. But
yeah.
what are you seeing around that, and what do
I
you make of
mean,
it?
I find it darkly funny. I think that
All
it
we
is.
have is dark humor now, by the way, so go for it.
Yeah, nothing
Mhm.
is just funny. Um, I mean, the idea, of course, there is feminist backlash here. Of course, there are men who are reacting to feminist gains and who are resentful and who feel disenfranchised by women's gains, right? Um, is that the fault of feminism? Like, that's a reaction to feminism. That's a reaction towards moving towards equality. But is that a fault of feminism? Should feminism have, somehow navigated this differently in a way to make them feel better about um, greater equality between the
Mm-hmm.
sexes?
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is absurd. And I think that since the beginning of feminism, there has been male backlash to feminism, and there has been the men's rights movement and men's work and all of this that has been, and then leading up to the red pill, which leads right up to Donald Trump. He is
What's the
sort of,
red pill?
Oh God.
oh gosh,
Oh
like the
Lord.
red pill on Reddit.
Reddit.
Like, I mean, it's just a whole, oh gosh, but just the
I don't know what it
manosphere.
is. Oh,
We'll
okay.
link to it.
The red pill is a feminist conspiracy theory that essentially says
Oh.
that actually it's women who have the power and that feminism is this oppressive force.
Mhm.
It's like a
Oh.
Proud Boy thing too. It's like
Uh-huh.
very adjacent to the
Women
Proud
have
Boys,
the
if you know
power.
about that.
Is is very
Lol.
relevant to Trump. I mean, I think in many ways, like Trump, the first time around was the manosphere's, candidate, and spoke to those male
Mm-hmm.
grievances.
Yeah.
And so I guess all of that is just to say that there has long been this running narrative counter to feminism that, it's actually, that men are really truly the oppressed class.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, yes, in short, I think it's absurd.
I also just want to add, and I'll probably say this a few times, but I think that we have to understand that right now the left and even feminist thought is pretty fractured post-election, and I would not make any sort of generalizations right now about all feminists or all
Yeah.
feminism or the left. I mean, I think there's a lot of very, sort of liberal, moderate feminism right now that is just moving further and further to the right. I think, on the left, I've observed, and I know Tracy has as well, this like sudden explosion of sort of writing about like loving men harder and saving men and don't give up on men. And
Mm.
honestly, it's wild. I feel to observe this happening post-election, and I'm still kind of finding my footing in terms of parsing out like my own reaction to this. I think the fact that we would see this misogynist administration rise to power after everything we saw in terms of the campaign, after as Tracy said, like the very well documented connection between the manosphere and this administration, that we would see them rise to power and the response would be like, hold your men close, like, hug them harder, ladies, like, let's love on men. This feels like a very confused, reactive moment.
Amanda, I've heard you talk about how too, like the project of feminism hasn't actually been realized. And so the thing that if we are going to, entertain the theory that, that it's this feminist world that is alienating men, this isn't actually the like dream of feminism, the world, the world we lived in, or, Obama's America or anything like that. Um, but and actually, the dream of feminism is much more inclusive of men and benefiting men.
Just like the absurdity of that in this moment. We are just over a week out from this election result. And if we actually think about the groups most deserving of empathy right now, my God, like,
Mm,
that is like white men with these grievances, like that, they're so not at the top of my list for empathy in this moment. Like, on a spiritual level, I believe in the importance of directing empathy towards all people, but like, it's a little bit of a reach for me right now.
hmm Well, this is how we're socialized too. I mean, I want to pull in, I returned to this old Anne Helen Peterson piece today about what she calls blue and red divorce, the kind of the ways that marriage and divorce work in blue America and red America. And she's talking about how, kind of blue Americans, Democratic women, are getting divorced less, actually. And she says that, this situation is complicated by the fact that bourgeois women have been taught that everything, whether the pay gap or enduring domestic labor discrepancies, can be fixed through hard work, hard communication work, hard organizational work, hard therapy work. If they just put in the hours in their relationships, on top of the hours they put into their jobs and their parenting and their body maintenance, everything would work out. The dream of having it all for so many bourgeois white women is still tantalizingly within reach. Others know it was never open to them in the first place. So that really hit me today. And I'm thinking about Miranda's looking in the mirror prompt, which I appreciate. For me, I read that paragraph and I had kind of a metaphorical looking in the mirror of, well, one, like I am trying to solve relationally this problem, this larger problem, right? And I'm taking it on for myself. And I'm also thinking that I'm having what I feel like now is a fantasy, given what just happened last week, that's all that will be required, right? That if I just that I'm a white woman of privilege, if I just reach my hand out to the men in my lives, if we can just listen and we can just do more work like that, we'll figure it out. Or the fantasy of this project of feminism being just within our reach. Yeah. Whereas I think more marginalized people know that has not happened.
I know that this is like, you know, we're all just processing, right? It's new.
Yes.
This is very new. So I think making space for that. And I assume people listening are themselves like, this may be overwhelming to listen to. I find it overwhelming, like my heart's beating faster. I'm still
Yeah.
just processing. And I think
Thanks for calling that out.
thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for making it a safe place. But I think one of the things that as a mother, right, like we live in the moment now and we also live in the future to our children and
Yeah.
grandchildren. We're always looking to that. And as I have a daughter and a son, and on this podcast and culturally, we have been talking a lot about young boys and what they need and this and that. And but my feeling after this election a lot is about my daughter and what, you know, she's very loud. She's very loud. She triggers me all the time with
She's
her
my
volume.
people. We turn out fine. We become podcast hosts.
Right.
Don't worry.
But I've been,
It doesn't pay
talking
the
to,
bills, but
I ran
it's
into this other mom
satisfying.
at this consignment store the other day, and we were chatting about that. And I was like, since the election, I've been very self-conscious of my asking her to speak more quietly,
Mm.
or say please. And I was listening to this other podcast called Tend Her Wild. That's I learned about it because Rachel Yoder was on it. And their post-election processing was about rereading, I guess, a classic book about the wild woman archetype. And so it's just I'm interested in some of the ways that women in my circles are getting curious about getting weird and what is this moment going to require of us? And I think I'm still in a place of turning inward. I'm aware that there will be things to do. And right now I'm, mirror gaze, looking inward, kind of listening. I don't want to frame it as know thy enemy, but I am a little bit I don't know this other. And I am very confused. And who are all these women and what are they so confused about? I think there is self-interest. And then I also want to there's even within the white women who voted for Trump demographic, there's got to be tons of diversity. I'm sure there's Christian nationalism. I'm sure there's lack of education. There's, just, I don't know, being young and stupid or too much TikTok. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
I'm in a place of like, who knows? I
well, good.
don't
The
know.
getting weird is an interesting idea. And in some ways, Tracy, I'm going back to your comment about the 4B movement,
Uh-huh.
and
Getting
I don't want
weird.
to,
Yeah.
I don't use weird in a negative way, by the way.
No, like the
In
Weird
my house,
Sisters. OG
we say weird
weird.
is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say that that has already been in the air culturally. Like, I think, books like Night Bitch, like All Fours,
Hmm.
there is this element of like feralness that is
Hmm.
being kind of channeled that I've found so fascinating. And the feralness has so much to do with bursting out of these domestic roles. And so that feels so completely relevant to this conversation about Trump and how he got elected and why white women voted for him. Because I would look to, like we were talking about earlier, like white women voting for Trump because they believe in accessing power through proximity to white men, right? And so um,
Yeah.
looking like zeroing in on the nuclear family and zeroing in on like what the nuclear family does to shape gender and gender roles, like this is exactly where we should be focused,
Yeah.
And I love the fact that like our these like, all fours and all of these this cultural ephemera is like actually really even prior to this, like bringing it to the surface in
Hmm.
this really poignant way.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, yeah, the nuclear family is like a disciplinary institution, right? That's what it does is it funnels us into gender roles and yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that you bring that up, Miranda, in terms of like getting unruly, getting
Loud.
disobedient, getting ungovernable. I mean, and I'm just thinking back to what we were talking about before, like that feminism has failed somehow. Like that's been in the discourse, that's absolutely been there for decades, So I think it's there, it's been available, and I think it is connected to the fact that what we're talking about with this administration and just sort of like larger American history is a very specific way of thinking about what women's lives can look like, what women's bodies can look like, their voices, and men's as well, you know and
Yeah.
that this conservative right machine, administration, the media machine that they're relying on is all about creating narratives that don't make it look that way, right? That make it look like actually women are the problem. Actually, women's liberation is the problem. Women getting unruly and rowdy is the problem. And so that's why I think I'm resistant to that story because that is a story that the right relies deeply on.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about our personal lives. Well, I'm just thinking about, we talked about, hetero marriage in the last part of this. And I'm wondering, for you all, how you've been thinking about the men in your lives since this election. Amanda, you published something, well, I've mostly been staying off the internet, but the one like take that I read really was yours the morning after the election. And, you said something that's been haunting me, which is that, thinking that the relations between men and women really may never recover from this and may never be the same. And so I'm wondering how those relations are feeling to you all. I see in my personal life with the men in my family that it isn't feminism that is oppressing my husband. It's capitalism, and that idea of masculinity, Amanda, that you said you've been trying to, unteach your son, which is the pressure to be the breadwinner and make money and, be highly competent and be virile and all of that is hard for my husband. And if feminism, had really met all of its goals, I think those things, wouldn't be there. But yeah, how's how are the gender relations in your life right now?
Yeah, I
Are you
mean,
seeing this affect, how you're seeing men in your community or
Yeah, I think for me, it's a big question. I'll be honest and say that like I'm trying to write a book about this
Yeah.
because I think that,
There's
like
plenty there.
there's so much there. And I think, what I have been interested in, even in my last book and for years is like, how do these huge political shifts and conversations affect our intimate lives?
Yeah.
And so we will all, in this, you know, conversation have different, ways of answering that question. And I think that it's like a journey, for lack of a better term, to sort of like parse all of that out. Um, I will say that, like, in my own experience and in my conversations that I've had with other women, um, there's often a disconnect between, some women and some progressive men because, like white men, especially white cis men, don't feel the heat right now. They don't feel like the direct threat, and maybe some do, right? But I have not encountered those men.
Yeah. I have a friend who just told me like one of her male coworkers was like, I think you guys are like overreacting. I think he meant by you guys, he meant women. And,
Right,
Wow.
and she's like, I cannot. Um,
right.
That's
And I
yeah,
mean,
that's
insane.
hard to hear.
I was
and we
dumb.
could talk about the ways in which, like, of this administration is going to affect all of us, like,
Yes.
absolutely. But whether, the men in our lives are feeling that or not is a different question. I would say too that, in my own experience and in the many women that I've talked to who are in, cis hetero marriages, I think that there's been years and years of sort of trying to patiently explain what that feels like
Mm,
to men,
hmm.
and at a certain point, for me, I simply like didn't want to spend my time trying to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And I have found I'm, moving through a divorce, like I've found that letting go of that work, um, I can find more pleasure in my life. I can find more connection. And often when we walk away, men figure it out themselves. And
Mm.
that can be really painful and that can be really uncomfortable for them. And that doesn't mean that that shouldn't be happening.
When we stop doing the work. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think you mentioned on your podcast too, like, we've women have been having tons of empathy for men forever. That has never been a problem. That is
Yeah.
actually we've overcorrected for that and that has been problematic. But it's not like there hasn't been empathy for men coming from women. So, but also just to the idea of kind of actually going in the other direction, kind of letting go of the need for that, while, remaining just generally compassionate towards, humanity is freeing, is tracks for me. How about you, Tracy?
I mean, on just to bring it back to our prior conversation of sex and marriage, like I would say in this post-election moment, I keep thinking back to my relationship to sex in the wake of grief. Um, it, I remember like losing my mom. I remember feeling like I cannot imagine ever wanting to have sex again. And I think like in this moment, I can imagine it, but I also have this like very intense feeling of no. And
Mm.
it's remarkable to like, I want so much to fight against that, but I have to say that like, sorry.
Yeah,
Uh,
no.
that's yeah.
Take your
Um,
time. It's very raw.
I think that we've been talking about 4B, and Tracy just did a really illuminating, highly intellectual interview about it. And I think there's so many things that I agree with in terms of what Sophie Lewis says about the limits of that movement.
Yeah.
But
We'll
I
link to
think
that interview. Yeah.
but what I think we're seeing online isn't necessarily an organized movement. It's maybe it's a protest, but it's also just an expression of emotion,
Yeah.
And I think that people are feeling a lot right now, and we can intellectualize it and we can, talk about this like it's this whatever gender war, but like what Tracy's feeling, what I'm feeling right now, Miranda, what you said you're feeling, your heart pounding, like these are expressions of really real, raw emotion as we stare down. Like relationships between men and women will never be the same. This country will never be the same. And what it will look like, we don't know. You know, it doesn't mean that all is lost and everything's destroyed, although it's going to get really fucking bad. And so yeah, I feel the emotion, Tracy.
Yeah, I think what I have like come to realize is that like I can like encounter these like shit posters who are cackling online about your body, my choice, and I can intellectually like react to it and sort of distance myself from it. And like as a feminist writing online for my entire adult career, like, and it's, you know, it's not unfamiliar. But I think the context in which that's happening of Donald Trump's win, what I have recognized is that my that lives in my body in a very real way that is like separate from my actual desire to have sex with my husband, who I, in this moment, feel like is a total partner and companion in like wanting to address this moment politically. Like you know, I don't feel like I have to explain it to him. I feel like he's totally showing up in exactly the way that I would hope that he would, you know? And yet, even still, you know, like the sort of somatic, like bodily experience of of encountering that kind of vitriol, and staring down the next 4 years and all of the unknowns of it, like there's this like I like the body says no, and it's just like and so
Yeah.
it's like, you know, and I think it's like if I in a pretty good like intimate domestic setting am feeling that, you know, like I'm imagining all sorts of other scenarios and what women might be feeling in those contexts. And so yes, like the 4B movement, it's like I am holding both this like I have my like, you know, intellectual political critique of it, and then I also have this like just total empathy for the response and for the just the general feeling of no.
Yeah. Yeah. That visceral reaction
Yeah.
um, to, male power and sexual need, which is sad too. That is part, it's a part where to me empathy is easy, not for the whole picture, but just I feel sad for my husband that, we went to like a hotel a few nights after the election and I made him like promise me that he wouldn't, you know, that he wouldn't try to be physically intimate with me unless I initiated. I was like, I just can't, I can't take that because I knew I knew that it would pull on that thread that we talked about in the last episode, but is so much more vibrant now about, where all of that lives in our society, right? And I feel sad for my husband. It's the system has failed him too. It's not feminism, it's more like capitalism, probably, and some other things, and um, racist patriarchy. But I feel sad for my son that these are the role models that he has in the larger world for men, that he's even seeing men acting like this, and I feel scared. Um, and yeah, it's in the house.
I
Yeah.
think if I can just add to, like, I think, well, two things. I think it's also important to keep in mind that there are many women who have not encountered a good man in their life.
Yeah.
You know, you know, I married the best man that I knew, and he still became a husband, you know, and we could go into that and talk about what that means. But, you know, I think some of us grow up, you know, with fathers, with male figures that are not great, you know, and so I think women who have great men in their lives, that's amazing. And I think it's important to understand that for a lot of women, that feels like a really foreign concept still.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes me sad too.
right. And the other thing that I wanted to say, you know, is that I think you know, to sort of personal piece, like what I have been feeling a lot lately is a lot of clarity around how much I give and give and give and give. And I think a lot of mothers can relate to this. And that, you know, it often feels like it's never enough. And so when I hear like discourse around like, well, women should be doing more of this or that or the other thing, that's just an impossible thing to take in. I like wake up and I, work my ass off for my family, for my kids, for, equality, for, all these things to try to kind of bring some clarity to like the discourse, God forbid, I hate that term, but and so this idea that like women need to be doing more when every single woman that I know in my life is absolutely at their max. I just think we need to press on that a little bit and think about why we're saying that and where that's coming
Yeah.
from.
Yeah, and I like that's why Amanda and I basically have this like text thread over the last week that's like sending back and forth all these examples of people saying, but what about the men, essentially. And like there was a piece in the Atlantic that was basically saying like maybe we shouldn't rail against the patriarchy anymore. Maybe our first step should be thanking the men in our lives who voted for Kamala Harris. And to me,
Sorry.
that I mean, that was my
I
reaction.
mean,
And to me,
yeah.
that it's,
Oh,
but to empathize with that perspective, I think it's one
yeah.
that's coming from fear. And it's like, oh
Mm,
shit, we need to like do
We can't
something to
lose
keep
these
men in
ones.
the
yeah.
fold, right?
Hmm.
But it's essentially asking women to, from my perspective, to mother men into an acceptance and understanding of our shared humanity and our rights. And so it's like to speak to Amanda's point, it's like it's more of the caretaking, it's more of the mothering. And my perspective is we are not going to mother our way out of patriarchy.
Yeah. I
Period.
think that, hearing that, something that I want to just bring up, and that's sort of for me part of what we're trying to do on this podcast, and that I know, both of you have reckoned with digital media and clickbait and, information age or whatever you want to call it. And I do think that from what I understand about Trump's strategic approach to winning this election, he really has people who work for him who do a wonderful job of manipulating the way information moves and in his favor. And um, so I question, an article like that. Is it coming from a real sentiment? Maybe a little bit. Or was it selling a headline, that people would click and then react to? And then we have feelings about it. And like, I think that I'm in a moment of like, as a person who participates in that, right? I make my
Right.
living thinking in headlines. Like I reach out to the cut because I have an idea and I realize that I even have the headline already. And I think they would think it would click. So then I've got another $1,500 in my bank account, and that, and
Mm-hmm.
it's me and everyone else. And I'm coming from a good place, coming from a genuine place. I'm writing from about things I care about. I'm writing on a platform that I think is smart or funny or run by smart people. And this is capitalism too, right? I mean, it's like this is late stage capitalism, but this is where I come to a place of questioning um like emotional reactions that I may even have. Like you're talking about, Tracy, in your body. Like all I know right now is like when I think about what happens, I have like a heart pounding, anxious feeling. And then like what that means, what that will mean, what is going to happen, what my role will be. Like all of that feels so unclear right now.
I
And I
think,
think
are
that
you
sitting in that lack of clarity is really
right?
important and not looking to because I do. I mean, I open my browser and I want to Google like what is going to happen.
Yeah,
Like
you're talking about the hot takes, kind of like that. We are still in hot take
the
territory
whole
with
like
this
news
election.
is that, right? And it's
Yeah.
even right, like the New York Times does it, like the whatever
Well,
name your
I think
platform.
that's an interesting way to kind of, close this conversation for now, or just, I mean, put a pin in it. Of course, we all know we're coming back for a part three. No, you have to live your lives. But is kind of Tracy and Amanda, where do you see us going with this conversation? around gender, around, hetero relationships, um, post hot take phase, right? We have a long 4 years ahead of us. And, we saw it already happened once. I think it's going to be different this time around, not in the way I want it to be. But it's not just the next 4 years, right? So what's the like long tail of this thing, do you think, for gender relations?
Well, I think responding to that and also to what you're saying, Miranda, I think a much larger conversation can be had about the state of journalism right now and the state of media,
Mm,
and the role that the right-wing media machine, as I mentioned, like played in this election and in disinformation and in all this rhetoric around, yeah, this youthful male misogyny that's just been stoked. I think. Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to say what's next.
Yeah, I guess the Q&A that I published today, my conversation with Sophie Lewis, who is the author of Abolish the Family, that I feel like is very representative of the kinds of thinking and conversations that I want to be doing right now, which is to say, like really focusing on the nuclear family and how it produces gender. And I think that as a frame is a perfect response to Trump and everything that he has run on. So that is really where I'm going to be focusing my attention and
mm.
critique.
Yeah, I mean, we came to that at the end of our last discussion, but I mean, the fire under that, I think, is so much greater than it
Yeah,
was just, just a few days ago. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about what's next in my personal relationships, I don't think, I mean, honestly, I think it would offend a lot of the men in my life who voted for Kamala if I thanked them for it. I think they too have a definition of what it means to be a good man that doesn't have, like basic humanity as the ceiling. Um, but I got to tell you, like, I'm compelled by conversation about sex strikes, for women who are in relationships with men. I'm compelled about ideas about more radical ways I can parent both my daughter and my son. Um, I'm compelled maybe to switch to a female gynecologist. I don't know. I went to see my beloved male gynecologist that I've had for 10 years that got me through 2 pregnancies,
You're
and
blowing
I
my
love him
mind,
so
Sarah.
much. Oh no, I know. I know people. Why? Because you're women.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know a lot of.
I go to, yeah.
He's so sweet. He's like a uncle. Well, if I say he's like an uncle, that actually makes it worse. He's a sweet older man. I really like the way that he tends to me. He's super attentive, and I really love his care. And I felt sad again, like I'm mad, but I also felt sad for this guy who I think does good work, that I was like, you know what? I don't know if I can after this. I don't know if while Trump is president, I can have a man touching my vagina, that, let alone, one that I'm not married
Period.
to.
Yeah. Oh my God.
What I would hope that we can hold in our minds, in the coming years too, is like, we have to start to think about what how we're going to survive, these next couple of years. And I'm very compelled by the notion of the sex strike and just really, consent and sexual refusal and, not forcing oneself to have sex in a misogynistic, cultural environment that makes that deeply uncomfortable. But I think we also need to think about pleasure and we need to figure out how we can have pleasure and joy, during this time and yet not do that in this like individualistic way that I kind of see like cropping up right now, where it's
Mm,
like self-care is really important,
yeah,
and,
I can't do the self-care
right.
comments now.
I
I'm
mean, it's
sorry.
it's
I know
important,
it's
right? Like
well
take care of
intended.
yourself, right? But how can we, to Tracy's point about the nuclear family, the nuclear family is its own kind of like alleged utopia, right? It's like this idea that like everything's like nice and private and there. But I think we need to get out of that and we need to start imagining more communal utopias that center, pleasure and that provide a kind of autonomous zone outside of all of this. What that's going to look like and how we're going to sort of like collectivize that and make that something that doesn't sound like something that would only happen in the East Bay.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to Tracy's big D desire from part one of this conversation, but I think since that conversation, I mean, we all have larger goals, of course, but the urgency to like expand a challenge like that, a necessity like that, to something that for a collective group feels greater. So
I assume for you all too, but there's been more active community seeking in our school community, in our neighborhood. The PTA tasks that I've been begrudgingly doing for a few months.
The only way to do it.
I threw myself into it a little more, like we're having a coat drive and I was like, cool, yes, I'm going to get this email out right now. Like coat drive. Yes. Like I think I'm just like, kids need winter coats. This is clear. This I know. This is something I can do something about,
Yeah, there's been a lot of discourse that I have appreciated. But Bess Kalb had something about this, about, starting small and thinking small politically. And I think that distinction between like, that doesn't just mean your family, right, is a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much, Tracy and Amanda, for joining us and thinking like small but big, I think, at the same time, holding those all together as we grapple with the precipice of a very difficult time that, yes, we know this election just kind of revealed has already been difficult. But I'm happy to have you all in my community for whatever lies ahead.
Likewise. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for making space for the conversation.
Thank you both. Thanks for listening to The Mother of It All. And like my mom always said, stay feral, baby girl. The Mother of It All is produced by Opus Knox Media with music from It's Electric. If you liked this episode, why not send it to a friend right now? Go on, we'll wait. You can follow us on Substack at themotherofitall.substack.com, where subscribing will get you episodes and bonus posts in your inbox and connect you with the Mother of It All listener community. Plus, become a paid subscriber and get a hot off the presses Mother of It All canvas tote. We're also on Instagram at The Mother of It All, and you can email us anytime with ideas or feedback at motherculturepod@gmail.com.